It was just another ordinary morning, or so I thought. The sound of my kids' laughter mixed with the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Rain drummed against the windows, and the clock seemed to tick faster than usual. My mind raced through the endless to-do list. Get the kids to school, finish work projects, clean the house. Life felt like a constant rush, but I never imagined it would come to a sudden stop that day. My name is Abigail. I am 38 years old, a mother of 3, and my life was as normal as anyone else's. At least it was until that rainy morning in June. That was the day I died, and what I experienced on the other side still haunts me. The house was its usual whirlwind of activity. My youngest had forgotten her lunchbox again, and I rushed down the stairs to grab it. My foot slipped, and in an instant I was falling. My body hit the stairs, pain exploded through me, and then nothing. Silence. The chaos of my house was gone. The sound of my children, the feel of the stairs beneath me, even the pain, it all disappeared. I floated in a strange stillness, weightless and detached. What happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. The silence was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a stillness that reached into every part of me. My body, my thoughts, even my breath seemed to hang suspended in an endless void. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't in my house anymore. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't lying on the stairs. Instead, I was floating above the scene. I saw myself, motionless and pale, sprawled at the bottom of the staircase. My husband, Ryan, was kneeling beside my body, his hands shaking as he tried to wake me. "Abigail, please, stay with me." His voice cracked, but I couldn't respond. I tried to move, to reach out to him, but nothing happened. My arms wouldn't lift, and no words came out. It was as if I were separated by an invisible wall, watching the world I had just left behind. I wanted to scream, but all I felt was a strange calm, like I was no longer a part of the chaos. Then everything shifted. The room faded, and a bright light surrounded me. It wasn't the harsh, blinding kind of light you'd expect. It was soft, warm, and filled with colors I'd never seen before. It wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time, I felt completely weightless. The light carried me to a new place. I found myself standing in a vast, open space, unlike anything I had ever seen. The ground beneath me wasn't solid, but it supported me as though it were alive. The air shimmered with energy, and the colors around me pulsed softly, as if the world itself was breathing. I should have felt at peace, but instead, a strange unease crept into my chest. That's when I saw him. In the distance, a figure appeared. He was walking toward me, his movements calm and steady. His clothes glowed with a brilliant white light, and though his face was hidden by the radiance, I felt his eyes on me. "Abigail," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to echo in the very air around me. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice trembled. "You cannot stay here," he said gently. "There is something you must see, something you must tell." Before I could ask what he meant, the ground beneath us shifted. The warm light began to fade and shadows crept in from every direction. "What's happening?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand and the shadows parted. What I saw made my heart stop. It was the world, but not as I knew it. The sky was gray, choked with smoke. Cities were in ruins, their streets eerily silent. People wandered aimlessly, their faces hollow and their eyes lifeless. A single date flashed before me. 2025. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is what awaits if they do not change," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. The vision shifted, showing families divided by anger, friends turning against one another, and people clinging to bitterness. Their unforgiveness hung over them like chains, dragging them down into despair. "Why are they like this?" I asked. He looked at me, his expression filled with sadness. "Unforgiveness," he said. "It poisons their hearts and destroys their souls." The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Can it be stopped?" I asked desperately. "Yes," he said firmly, "but only if they choose to let go of their hatred and forgive." The vision shifted again, and I saw something different, something hopeful. People knelt in prayer, families embraced, and communities came together in love. Their faces glowed with peace, and the chains that had bound them disappeared. "The future is not set," he said. "You must return and tell them what you have seen. Warn them before it is too late." The light around me began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back back into the world I had left behind. When I opened my eyes, the world I had known was gone. I stood in a strange place, watching scenes unfold like a living dream. It felt like I was seeing the future. But it wasn't the future anyone would hope for. The first image appeared. Families sat together at dining tables, but their faces were distant, their voices cold. Conversations turned to arguments, and arguments became shouting matches. I saw friends walking away from each other, their backs stiff with anger. Husbands and wives exchanged sharp words, their love buried under resentment. The air was heavy, thick with something invisible but unmistakable. Bitterness. It clung to people like a shadow, weighing them down and darkening their hearts. The figure in white stood beside me, his voice calm but full of sorrow. This is what happens when unforgiveness takes root. It destroys families, friendships, and even nations. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The images changed, growing darker and more terrifying. I saw hospitals overflowing with people gasping for air, their faces pale with sickness. Streets once full of life were now silent, littered with debris. Then the ground beneath my feet seemed to shake, and a wave of destruction swept through the scene. Hurricanes tore apart cities, floods swallowed entire towns, and fires consumed everything in their path. The date flashed again. 2025. I turned to the figure beside me, my voice trembling. Why is this happening? What's causing all of this? Unforgiveness, he said simply. When people choose bitterness over love, it spreads like a disease. It poisons their hearts and blinds them to what truly matters. This is the result of their choices. I felt a chill run through me as the images continued. I saw lines of people gathered in a barren wasteland. Their faces were hollow, their bodies hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. They stood in silence, their eyes cast downward, waiting for something I couldn't understand. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This is where souls come to give an account," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. Many lived successful lives, but their hearts were hardened. They clung to grudges and anger until it was too late. I watched as one person after another stepped forward. Each one faced a moment of reckoning. Their sorrow was overwhelming as they saw their lives with perfect clarity. Missed opportunities to love, moments where they could have forgiven but didn't. It all played before them like a painful movie. The figure turned to me. "Their choices have consequences, but it is not too late. That is why you are here." The images shifted again, and this time I saw hope. Light began to break through the darkness. People knelt in prayer, tears streaming down their faces. Families embraced, offering forgiveness to one another. Communities came together, their faces glowing with peace and love. "The future is not set," he said. "There is still time, but they must choose to change. You must return and tell them what you have seen. Warn them before it is too late." I felt the weight of his words settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just a vision, it was a mission. I felt myself sinking, like being pulled from a dream I wasn't ready to leave. The radiant light around me dimmed, and I found myself back in the strange stillness of that realm. The figure in white stood before me, his gaze unwavering. "You must return," he said firmly. "They need to hear what you have seen. You cannot stay here." His words hit me like a wave. I didn't want to leave. This place, with its peace and warmth, felt like home. The thought of returning to the chaos of the world filled me with dread. "But how can I do this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm just one person. Who will listen to me?" The figure stepped closer, and though his face remained hidden, I could feel his compassion. "You do not need to be extraordinary, you need only to be willing. The rest will be provided." I lowered my head, struggling to accept the weight of the task he was giving me. "What if I fail? What if no one believes me?" "You are not responsible for how they respond," he said gently. "You are responsible for sharing the truth. The rest is up to them." I nodded slowly, though fear still gripped me. The figure raised his hand, and once again, the world shifted around me. The vision of Earth returned, but this time I saw it as it could be. Families were whole again, embracing each other with love. Friends reunited, their hearts lighter without the burden of grudges. Communities worked together, their joy and peace radiating outward. "This is what is possible," the figure said, "but it will not happen unless they choose forgiveness and love over bitterness and pride." I turned to him, determination growing in my chest. "I'll do it. I'll tell them." His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth spread through me. "Go with courage, you are not alone." The light around me brightened, and I felt myself being pulled back. The serene stillness was replaced by chaos. I opened my eyes to the sharp beeping of monitors and the hushed whispers of nurses. My chest felt heavy, not with pain, but with the enormity of what I had just experienced. My husband, Ryan, sat at my bedside, his eyes wide with relief. "You're awake," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. Tears streamed down my face as I took his hand. "Ryan, there's so much I need to tell you." The soft glow of the hospital room was a jarring contrast to the world I had just left. I blinked, trying to adjust to the harsh reality that I was back. The rhythmic beeping of monitors filled the air, and the sterile smell of disinfectant stung my nose. My chest felt heavy, but it wasn't pain, it was the weight of everything I had seen. Ryan sat by my side, gripping my hand so tightly it almost hurt. His eyes were red, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Abigail," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I lost you." I squeezed his hand weakly. "Ryan, I need to tell you something. It's important." He leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "What is it? Are you okay?" I tried to find the right words, but how could I explain something so overwhelming? "I saw something. I wasn't here. I was somewhere else." Ryan's expression shifted from relief to confusion. "What do you mean? You were unconscious. The doctor said you." His voice caught, and he couldn't finish the sentence. I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. "I died, Ryan." For a moment I was gone, but I came back, because I was sent back. "There's a message I have to share." His face paled. "You're scaring me, Abigail. What are you talking about?" I looked into his eyes, hoping he could feel the truth in my words. "I saw what's coming, Ryan. The world is heading for something terrible. But it doesn't have to happen. There's still time to change things. But people need to know." Before he could respond, the door opened and a nurse walked in. She smiled warmly, but glanced at the monitors with a professional air. "How are we feeling, Mrs. Miller?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, though my voice was weak. She checked the machines and scribbled something on her clipboard. "You gave everyone quite a scare. You're lucky your husband got you here so quickly." Ryan gave a faint smile, but didn't look away from me. I could see the questions swirling in his mind. When the nurse left, he leaned closer. "Abigail, I don't understand. What exactly did you see?" Tears welled up in my eyes as the memories of the vision flooded back. "I saw the future, Ryan. I saw what happens when people hold on to bitterness and refuse to forgive. It destroys everything, families, friendships, even the world itself." He stared at me, struggling to process my words. "And you were told to share this?" "Yes," I whispered. "I was sent back to warn people. We don't have much time. If we don't change, 2025 will bring more pain and destruction than we can imagine." The weight of my words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan nodded slowly, his grip on my hand tightening. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together. You're not alone." The days after I left the hospital felt surreal. My body was healing, but my heart carried a burden that words couldn't fully express. Ryan stayed close, always watching me with concern, but I knew he was holding back questions. How could I explain what I had seen without sounding crazy? On the second evening home, I sat with him at the kitchen table. The kids were finally asleep, and the house was quiet. It felt like the right moment. "Ryan," I began, my voice steady but low, "there's more I need to tell you." He set down his cup of coffee, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm listening." I hesitated, the weight of my vision pressing on me. What I saw wasn't just about our family or our community. It was bigger than that. It was the whole world. People holding on to anger, refusing to forgive. It's tearing everything apart. Ryan leaned forward, his brows furrowing. "Abigail, this sounds, I don't even know what to say. Are you sure it wasn't just a dream?" "You hit your head pretty hard." I shook my head firmly. It wasn't a dream. It was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. And I was sent back with a purpose. I have to tell people. They need to know what I saw. He was quiet for a long moment, then he sighed. "Okay, let's start with us. If this is about forgiveness, maybe we should look at our own lives first." His words hit me hard because they were true. In our marriage, we had avoided certain conversations, let small wounds fester into unspoken grievances. And with others, friends, family, I had held on to grudges I didn't even realize I carried. The next morning, I began making calls I had avoided for years. Each one was painful in its own way. I apologized to my sister for the fight we had years ago that had left us barely speaking. I reached out to an old friend I had fallen out with over something I could barely remember. To my surprise, the responses were overwhelmingly emotional. My sister cried on the phone, telling me she had been waiting for this call, but didn't know how to make the first move. My friend admitted she had missed me and wanted to let the past go. With each conversation, a small weight lifted from my heart. It wasn't perfect. Some people were skeptical, unsure of my sudden need to make amends. But it was a start. Ryan followed my lead, calling his estranged brother. Their conversation was short and awkward, but it ended with a promise to meet for coffee. It was progress. But I knew that wasn't enough. The message wasn't just for us, it was for everyone. I need to share this with more people, I told Ryan one evening. Not just family and friends, but anyone who will listen. He nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. How do you plan to do that? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I can't stay silent. I'll find a way. The next day, I reached out to our local church. The pastor, a kind and open-minded man, listened as I poured out my story. His expression shifted from disbelief to quiet understanding as I spoke. "This is a powerful message," he said when I finished. "If you're willing, I'd like you to share this with our congregation." The thought of speaking in front of so many people terrified me, but I knew I had to do it. The day I stood in front of the church congregation, my knees felt like they might give out. Rows of faces stared back at me, some curious, others skeptical. My hands trembled as I gripped the microphone, but I took a deep breath and reminded myself why I was there. "I'm here to share something that changed my life forever," I began, my voice shaky but steady enough to carry across the room. "A few weeks ago, I experienced something I can only describe as a glimpse into what's coming. It wasn't a dream. It was real, and it's a message we all need to hear." The room grew quiet. I could feel the weight of their attention, the way their curiosity pulled them closer to my words. "I died," I continued. "For a brief moment, I left this world. I saw things that terrified me, but I also saw hope, and I was sent back with one purpose: to tell you what I saw." I told them everything, from the moment I slipped on the stairs to the radiant figure who spoke to me. I described the visions of 2025, the anger, the bitterness, the destruction, and the lives consumed by unforgiveness. Some faces softened, tears welling in their eyes as I spoke of families torn apart and friendships broken by resentment. Others looked skeptical, their expressions unreadable. But I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "This isn't just about me," I said, my tone firm. "It's about all of us. If we don't change, if we don't let go of our anger and choose forgiveness, we risk losing everything. But it doesn't have to be this way. There's still time. The future isn't set." When I finished, the silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought no one would respond. Then, a woman in the back stood up. "My sister and I haven't spoken in years," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been too proud to forgive her. But I think it's time to make that call." Another man raised his hand. "I've been holding a grudge against my father for decades. I didn't realize how much it was eating away at me. Thank you for reminding me what's important." One by one, people began sharing their stories, their voices raw with emotion. The room transformed from a place of quiet skepticism to a space filled with hope and healing. Afterward, as I stood by the door, people approached me, some with tears streaming down their faces. "Thank you," they whispered. "Your story touched my heart." But not everyone was moved. A few people brushed past me without a word, their expressions tight with disbelief. One man even muttered under his breath, "What a bunch of nonsense." The sting of rejection was sharp, but I reminded myself of the figure's words. "You are not responsible for how they respond. You are responsible for sharing the truth." That night, as Ryan and I sat in the living room, he took my hand and smiled. "You did it," he said softly. "You've planted a seed." I nodded, though my heart was still heavy. "It's just the beginning," I replied. "There's so much more to do." As the days turned into weeks, I continued sharing my story with anyone who would listen. Churches, community centers, and even small gatherings in living rooms became my platforms. Each time I stood in front of new faces, feeling the same nerves grip me, but the message always came through. Many people were moved, their tears and heartfelt responses giving me hope. But not everyone believed me. At one church, as I spoke about the vision of 2025 and the destructive power of unforgiveness, a man in the back interrupted me. "This sounds like some made-up story," he said, his tone sharp. "What proof do you have? How do we know you're not just looking for attention?" The room fell silent, and I could feel the eyes of the audience shifting between us. My heart raced, but I stood firm. I don't have physical proof, I admitted, my voice steady. All I have is my experience and the message I was sent to share. What you choose to do with it is up to you. He scoffed, shaking his head, and walked out. A few others followed, their skepticism clear. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my notes. Doubt crept into my mind. Was I really making a difference? Was anyone truly listening, or was this all for nothing? Ryan sat down beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," he said gently. "But what if it's not enough?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not about numbers," he replied. "Even if you change one heart, that's enough." The next day, I spoke at a small gathering in a friend's living room. The group was intimate, and their questions were genuine. One woman shared how she had been estranged from her daughter for over a decade. "I've been holding on to so much anger," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Hearing your story made me realize I need to let it go." Moments like these gave me strength, but the criticism didn't stop. Online, people began questioning my story, calling me delusional or accusing me of fabricating everything. The harsh comments stung, but I reminded myself of the man in white's words. "You are not responsible for how they respond. You are responsible for sharing the truth." Despite the challenges, I pressed on. Each rejection was a reminder of the weight of the mission. I knew I couldn't give up, not when there was still so much at stake. Slowly but surely, the message began to spread. It started with small ripples. Individuals who heard my story and decided to take action. Some reached out to estranged family members, others forgave old friends, and many simply let go of the bitterness they had carried for years. One day I received a phone call from a woman named Hannah. She had attended one of my talks at a small community center. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Abigail, I want you to know that your story changed my life," she said. "I hadn't spoken to my father in 20 years. We had a terrible argument and I thought I could never forgive him. But after hearing you, I realized I couldn't carry the anger any longer. I called him yesterday. We talked for hours. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my heart." Her words brought tears to my eyes. This was the reason I kept going, even when it was hard. As more people shared their stories, I realized the message was taking on a life of its own. People began inviting me to speak at larger events. Churches from neighboring towns reached out, asking if I could come and share my testimony. Ryan became my biggest supporter, often traveling with me and helping to organize my talks. Our own relationship began to heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. The unspoken hurts we had both harbored were slowly replaced with understanding and love. But with the growing attention came more criticism. Online, skeptics continued to question my story. "Another fraud trying to get famous," one comment read. "Don't fall for this nonsense," said another. At first, the negativity weighed on me. I wanted to defend myself, to argue with every accusation. But Ryan reminded me of something important. "Focus on the people you're helping," he said. "The rest doesn't matter." He was right. For every critic, there were countless others who found hope and healing through the message. One evening, after a particularly emotional talk, a young man approached me. His name was Caleb, and he looked no older than 20. "I've been so angry at my mom for leaving us," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I blamed her for everything. But I realize now that holding on to that anger has only hurt me. I want to forgive her. I need to forgive her." I placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "That's a brave decision, Caleb. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain, but it frees your heart to heal." Moments like this kept me going. I began to see how far-reaching the message could be. It wasn't just about avoiding destruction in 2025. It was about transforming lives in the present. By the time I reached my final talk of the year, the room was packed. People from all walks of life had gathered, some out of curiosity, others seeking answers. I stood at the front, my heart heavy with the weight of the message, but also full of hope. As I looked across the room, I began with the same words I always did. What I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a warning, but it's also a message of hope. What I saw was terrifying, but it doesn't have to be our future. I recounted my vision of 2025, the division, the anger, the destruction. I spoke about the weight of unforgiveness and how it had consumed lives, tearing apart families, friendships, and even nations. But then I shifted the tone, focusing on the light I had seen breaking through the darkness. "I saw a world transformed," I said. my voice steady and clear. I saw people choosing forgiveness over anger, love over bitterness. I saw families healed, communities united, and hearts freed from the chains of resentment. The future is not set. We still have time to change, but it begins with each of us. The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, a hand went up. "What can we do to stop this?" a woman asked, her voice trembling. "Start with yourself," I replied. "Look at your own heart. Who do you need to forgive? What anger or bitterness have you been holding on to? Let it go, not just for their sake, but for yours. Forgiveness is the key to breaking the cycle of pain and destruction." Another voice called out, "But what if the person doesn't deserve forgiveness?" I nodded, understanding the struggle. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger. It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did, but it allows you to heal and move forward. As the questions continued, I could feel a shift in the room. People were beginning to see the truth of the message. They weren't just hearing my words, they were feeling them. After the talk, a line of people formed to speak with me. One by one, they shared their stories, grudges they had held for years, relationships they longed to mend, pain they were ready to release. Some cried, others simply thanked me, but each one carried a spark of hope. Ryan stood by my side, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You're making a difference," he said softly. I nodded, though tears blurred my vision. "It's not just me," I replied, "it's them. They're the ones choosing to change." As we drove home that night, I thought about the figure in white and the vision he had shown me. His words echoed in my mind. The future is not set. I knew my mission wasn't over. There were still more people to reach, more hearts to touch. But for the first time, I felt a deep sense of peace. The seeds of hope had been planted, and I trusted they would grow. As I reflect on everything I've experienced and the countless lives I've seen touched by this message, one thing remains clear. The choice is ours. The vision of 2025 was terrifying, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was a warning, yes, but also a reminder that change is possible. Every decision we make matters. Every time we choose forgiveness over anger, love over bitterness, and peace over pride, we take a step toward a brighter future. This isn't just about avoiding destruction. It's about building something beautiful, something lasting, for ourselves and the generations to come. So I ask you, the one reading or listening to this message, will you let go of the weight you've been carrying? Will you forgive, even when it feels impossible? Will you choose to love, even when it's hard? The future isn't written yet, and your choices can make all the difference. If this message has resonated with you, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect and take action. Let go of the grudges, repair the relationships, and share this hope with others. And if you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like this video, comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps this message reach more people who need it, spreading hope, forgiveness, and love to a world that desperately needs it. Together, we can make a difference. Let's face the future, not with fear, but with faith, hope, and hearts ready to heal. Thank you for being part of this journey.